This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Attackers kill 53 people in Nigeria as President Buhari pledges to crush militant groups. Malians react as France withdraws troops amid the fight against jihadists. And hospitals in Kinshasa overwhelmed by a surge in COVID-19 cases. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In your sport, Raheem Sterling's strike hands England victory in their Euro 2020 opener. We begin in Nigeria, where armed bandits are reported to have killed at least 53 people. The attack happened in Zamfara State in the northwestern part of the country. Police say on Thursday through Friday, gunmen riding motorcycles invaded 6 villages, including Kadawa, Kwata, and Muduba. The gang attacked farmers in fields and pursued others who had fled. Police have since been deployed in the area following the attacks. Meanwhile, in a televised address, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has reiterated his pledge to end insecurity in the country. President Buhari had vowed to end the Boko Haram insurgency when he was re-elected back in 2015, but he now says government efforts are unintentionally spreading more violence to other areas.
Fellow Nigerians, when you elected me as your president in 2015, you did so knowing that I will put an end to the growing insecurity, especially the insurgency in the northeast. But the unintended consequences of scattering them in the northeast push them further in country, which is what we are now facing and dealing with. We will, by the grace of God, put an end to these challenges too. Unfortunately, like in most conflict situations, some Nigerian criminals are taking undue advantage of a difficult situation and profiteering therefrom with the misguided belief that adherence to the democratic norms handicaps this administration from promptly and decisively tackling them. We are already addressing these obstacles, and we will soon bring some of these culprits to justice. We are, at the same time, addressing the twin underlying drivers of insecurity, namely poverty and youth unemployment.
France is to begin a gradual withdrawal of its troops in the Sahel region after French President Emmanuel Macron announced the end of the Barkhane military operation in the region earlier this week. France suspended all military cooperation with Mali following the May 24th coup there. Nogutula Chabalala reports on the mixed reaction towards France's decision.
Operation Barkhane was launched on August 1st, 2014 in Mali. Its mission was to fight terrorist groups in Burkina Faso, Chad and Niger. French soldiers supported the Malian armed forces on a daily basis as they lacked resources and equipment on the ground. France says it will be drawing down this operation and the details will be finalized by the end of June. On the streets of Mali, there have been mixed reactions to France's announcement.
Quite frankly, I know that if Barkhane force leaves our country now, our army cannot take over. They don't have the right equipment and we don't have any troops. The combat zone is very large. Frankly, we are afraid.
Dissatisfied with France's presence and the results of Operation Barkhane, Malians took to the streets on Saturday.
We went out to fight the French policy towards our country because it destroys many things in Mali. We have seen that the killings by the jihadists do not stop. Intercommunity conflicts also continue. Moreover, we cannot understand why people come with 20, 30 or 40 motorcycles to destroy villages within a radius of less than 10 kilometers. As it stands today, 134 villages have been wiped off the Malian map. So we want France to leave our country.
France has 5,100 soldiers stationed in the Sahel. They are spread over an area of more than 5 million square kilometers. Some African experts say militaries from Burkina Faso, Mali or Niger are not yet ready to face the security challenge on their own. Others see France's withdrawal as an opportunity for other key players to step in.
This announcement will galvanize terrorist groups. They will think that they have a free hand to carry out their attacks. The second consequence is that it will lead our states to take responsibility for this situation of insecurity. And I think that this is a positive. The third consequence concerns France itself. It risks losing control over several countries. Because today, we see Sahelian countries getting closer to Russia and even Turkey. These two countries are trying to establish themselves in the Sahel.
An alliance structured with the African and European partners is now expected to replace the Barkhane operation. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
It's widely known that Africa is endowed with vast resources. The struggle for control of these resources has raged on since colonial times and continues to this day. The West has been on the spot for invading poor nations to access their natural resources, but there's little evidence of the West's attempts to develop the continent. For instance, recently it emerged that UK aids to African countries could be cut by up to 66%. Wilke Sanyawa reports.
On Saturday, leaders of the G7 countries, some of the world's largest economies, unveiled an infrastructure plan for the developing world. The G7 partnership, dubbed Build Back Better World, aims to finance development projects in developing countries, Africa included. But though the promises sound promising, they are prefaced by a history of the West's scramble for control of Africa's resources, which has often left the continent disenfranchised. The struggle for control over Africa's natural resources has raged since the colonization of the continent. South Africa's potential mineral wealth, for example, is estimated to be around $2.5 trillion, while the mineral reserves of the Democratic Republic of Congo are thought to be worth $24 trillion. The onset of colonialism saw African economies destroyed and fragmented. African countries became providers of raw materials such as unprocessed minerals, timber and agricultural products for the development of other countries. It continues today as the forces that undermine Africa shift from the former colonizers to Western transnational corporations. A 2017 report by a coalition of UK and African equality and development campaigners, including Global Justice Now, found that more wealth leaves Africa every year than enters it. The key factors contributing to this inequality include unjust debt payments and multinational companies hiding proceeds through tax avoidance and corruption. The report argued that the prevailing narrative, where rich country governments say their foreign aid is helping Africa, is a distraction and misleading. It has further emerged that UK aid to individual African countries is being cut by 66% this year. And as the G7 countries mull over the infrastructure project, some experts say transforming aid into a process that genuinely benefits the continent could be more beneficial. And now back to you.
Well, let's stay with that story. There are analysts who say that a reduction of aid to Africa, as well as competition for a slice of its wealth, could have an impact on the continent's least developed economies. To unpack this further, earlier we spoke with Menzi Ndlovu, a senior political and risk analyst based in South Africa.
We have seen Western funding and funding from Western government or multilateral institutions being attached to conditionalities that are not necessarily aligned to political and cultural norms in specific developing and African settings. Historically, what has been of contention or particularly problematic were structural adjustment requirements that were attached to loans from institutions like the IMF, which typically required some wide sweeping political changes. But fortunately, we are seeing a bit of a normative shift when it comes to Western aid. And I think that comes from the realization that these demands or extensive demands are no longer as viable in this new context where African governments are becoming more assertive. So what we are seeing now is greater consideration of the local context. We are seeing less assertiveness for certain kinds of political changes and cultural changes. And we are also seeing greater engagement with local stakeholders, which I think is leading to a particular shift when it comes to Western funding and making it more aligned with the countries that they intend to assist. And hopefully we can see fewer contentions in the future due to this more considered approach. When it comes to the balance in agreements between African states and multinational companies and the relationships thereof, historically, there are, as you alluded to, many instances in which these deals were skewed, very largely in part because of power dynamics and unbalanced power dynamics. But I think at the same time, we must recognize African governments as agencies in some of these dealings. Firstly, in many instances, the regulatory environment in many African states has been uncertain and characterized by loopholes that were then exploited by some entrants. And also we need to recognize that a lot of these statesmen that are now crying foul were involved in the cementing of some of these deals. And quite frankly, they didn't bargain properly. I think we need to recognize that our strength is as a collective, all right? We are stronger when we are together. And it's important that as a bloc, as African states, we need to come together when negotiating deals with large players, as opposed to attempting to gazumping each other. And in doing so, we can strengthen our bargaining power as a bloc.
Let's head over to Israel, where the parliament there is voting on a new government that could unseat the country's longest-serving prime minister. Lawmakers are expected to approve the coalition dubbed the Change Government, which would name conservative hardliner Naftali Bennett as prime minister, and end Benjamin Netanyahu's 12 years in power. Stephanie Fried has more from Jerusalem.
Right this moment, Naftali Bennett, he will be the incoming prime minister of the new coalition if all goes as his plan dictates and as it looks like it is headed in that direction to go. At the moment, he's meeting with his coalition party heads. They're basically making sure that everyone's still in line, everyone's still on board, that in a few hours, when the vote comes up to vote confidence in this new coalition, that all of those members are still committed to the new coalition. At the same time, right below me, we're hearing protests. I understand and met some people. People are protesting in a way. They're in favor of this new incoming coalition. They're saying not necessarily do they favor Naftali Bennett, who's the prime minister to be, but they really, really don't favor Benjamin Netanyahu. They want to see him go. So they're out down below. Safe to assume that there are people on the other side who don't want to see Benjamin Netanyahu go, that are on the other side of these pro-change protesters, if you will. This is a historic day. Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, 15 years, 12 of those consecutive. To put that into some perspective, if you talk to a 17-year-old today in Israel, let's say they were becoming aware of politics at around age 5, they've known no other prime minister other than Benjamin Netanyahu.
Let's now take a short break and return. 12 people killed and nearly 140 others injured in a gas explosion in central China. And hospitals in Kinshasa overwhelmed by a surge in COVID-19 cases.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, It matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping is calling for safety improvements after a deadly gas explosion in central China. At least 12 people were killed, nearly 140 others were injured in the massive blast on Sunday morning in a residential area of Xi'an in Hubei province. The government has sent a special task force to help with the rescue efforts. Brian Dorman has more.
A powerful gas explosion rocked through a local community in the city of Xi'an on Sunday morning. The shockwave destroyed a market and severely damaged several residential buildings. A CCTV reporter visited the core area of the blast.
我们先走近一下，看一些细节，比如说看我眼前的这一段钢筋啊，你看这么扎实的一段钢筋，它其实是被炸弯的，而且呢，来看一下我身边的这块预制板。 这块预制板其实消防员告诉我，之前是在2楼的。那在爆炸发生之后呢，它也直接掉落到了1楼。
Hubei's provincial government issued an early emergency response, sending a special task force to lead rescue and disaster relief efforts. 2,000 emergency workers have been dispatched to the scene of the accident. 150 people have been rescued.
We are trying the best to save lives and ensure the safety of relocated residents. We are investigating the cause of the incident and conducting safety appraisals in nearby buildings. We will keep the public updated.
Local authorities say 37 people have been hospitalized as critically injured.
There was mud all over my face and body. The doctors cleaned me up. They also bought me lunch. I hurt my back in the explosion.
The city hasn't reported a blood shortage, but long lines were seen outside local blood donation centers to help victims.
Brian
Dorman, CGTN.
Well, Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi says that hospitals in the capital Kinshasa are overwhelmed with COVID-19 cases. On Friday, the DRC recorded 254 infections, the highest number of coronavirus cases since the outbreak began. Addressing the media on Saturday, Tshisekedi said that he would be taking drastic measures to combat the spread of the virus. The DRC has so far recorded about 35,000 cases and 830 deaths, including those of prominent politicians. Less than 30,000 citizens have been inoculated in the country that has a population of more than 100 million people. Earlier, we spoke with Chris Ochambringa.
The DRC is experiencing the third wave of infections. Officials from the National Institute for Biomedical Research say there are 35,000 COVID-19 cases across the country, but about 25,000 of those cases have been recorded here in the capital, Kinshasa. And they are very concerned because people have not been respecting the health measures issued by the experts. And so the president mentioned that the hospitals in Kinshasa have been overwhelmed by patients with COVID-19, and they do not have enough equipment to support, to help these people, the patients. The country has very few oxygen cylinders, and so it's a cause for concern. The president also mentioned that, the AstraZeneca vaccine has been problematic because of fears the Congolese have about side effects, and so he's been talking about bringing in other vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna so that more Congolese can start taking up these vaccines. Now, the measures that the government has taken is that it has imposed a curfew from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. and also urged people to keep wearing masks and, keep social distancing. But that hasn't been happening. Very many people crowd in places. They do not wear masks. The police who are supposed to enforce, these measures haven't been, following through. And so the cases have really shot up, and it's a cause for concern among Congolese officials.
The fight in the coronavirus is proving to be a long and complex battle. While vaccines are widely seen as the most efficient way to curb its spread, their uneven distribution is bringing uncertainty to the global recovery. The WHO worries that developed countries are too focused on their own populations as the developing world suffers.
As much of the developing world cries out for coronavirus vaccines, the United States is destroying some of its stock. At the heart of the problem is vaccine maker Johnson & Johnson. Its vaccine was the third to be approved in the U.S. and has played a lesser role in the country's rollout compared to those of Moderna and Pfizer. Millions of doses were held up in April over safety concerns, which severely cut into their limited shelf life. With demand dwindling in the U.S., officials warned this week that millions of Johnson & Johnson shots would expire before the end of this month, which means they may need to be binned. Meanwhile, on Thursday, they said the company must throw away millions of jabs that were manufactured at a problem-plagued Baltimore factory over quality issues.
The manufacturing of a vaccine is a really specific process, and any vaccine that is offered to you has passed hundreds, maybe thousands of quality control checks. And those lots or those doses didn't pass, and they didn't have the full confidence of the FDA, and so, they'll be destroyed.
Meanwhile, a record number of people who can get a vaccine in their home country are traveling to the United States to get inoculated. Officials believe this trend will continue. Among those traveling are people from as far as Paraguay. In April, the migration offices began to see an increase of Paraguayans traveling abroad. There were some 2,600 travelers that month, and in May, the figure nearly tripled to 7,000.
Because I don't have hope to obtain a vaccine in my country.
Right now, I think it's cheaper to go get vaccinated than to spend more than 5 days in the hospital.
Wealthy countries, including the U.S., have been able to acquire the largest supplies of vaccines, but they're also being criticized for not doing more to help the world's poorer countries. The World Health Organization says nearly 90%, that's 47 out of 54 African countries, could miss a summer target of vaccinating 10% of their population against the coronavirus, even as they grapple with surging infections.
6 months since the first vaccines were administered, high-income countries have administered almost 44% of the world's doses. Low-income countries have administered just 0.4%. The most frustrating thing about this statistic is that it hasn't changed in months. Inequitable vaccination is a threat to all nations, not just those with the fewest vaccines.
The WHO chief said the vaccine inequality issue has created a two-track pandemic, with Western countries protected and poorer nations still exposed. He also warned that despite a global decrease in the number of cases, Africa, the Americas, and the Western Pacific are still seeing an increase in the number of deaths. The efficient distribution and use of vaccines is now considered to be more urgent than ever.
Well, it's time now for a short break. In return, Raheem Sterling's strike hands England victory in their Euro 2020 opener.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.
Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now for the latest in sport, England beat Croatia 1-0 in the opening game of their Euro 2020 campaign at Wembley on